HiSec Buyback offers 90% GDA anywhere in HiSec. Simply go to hisec.evebuyback.com, appraise your items, create a contract, and get paid quickly.
And you're on.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Talking in Stations for this Thursday, October the 21st. I am Rundle, Allnighter, your host here tonight, as I was last Thursday and probably the Thursday before that. And like last Thursday, I got Nick Bison in the background doing all the top quality engineering work. Say hi, Nick, if you can.
Well, let's see if my mic's actually working this time.
All right, mic check for Nick. Let's see if it works. Someone tell us in the audience if you heard him. I can hear him here, but that doesn't mean he's necessarily you hear him. And I do have a guest here tonight, Murray Rothbardo. Just say hi, Murray, and we'll get to your introduction later.
Hello, hello.
All righty. So tonight's title of the show is Pochven Ain't That Easy. As you can guess, a little bit of feedback from last week's show. But before we get to that, pretty short information on game stuff, patch notes, stuff like that. But we got a couple little patch notes. We'll start with those. So really, I'm just going to make a comment about, normally it was only on Thursdays or on Tuesdays, right? And I like now that they've started kind of doing a couple days a week and doing a couple little things. So I applaud CCP for that. Today's patches, a couple technical ones, issue where fonts were becoming distorted when relaunching a maximized window game client. So I'm sure that was annoying as all get out for anyone who encountered that. So they fixed that. They also fixed an issue where maximized window clients showed incorrect overlay effects directly after the game started on certain Windows versions. So not sure what Windows versions those were. So if they're old one, bump them up, get your new Windows up and running. You'll enjoy it. P.S. I do own Windows stock, Microsoft stock. So buy those Windows. Be legit. Just kidding. All right. Another element starting this weekend, if you are in the US and you are lucky enough to be traveling to Las Vegas this weekend for eVegas, we'll then have a lot of fun, enjoy it. It looks like a fair number of people are going, despite the still ongoings with the pandemic and stuff. If you're traveling worldwide and getting here, safe travels. Hope you have an enjoyable time. Looking forward to some stories, and I think a few of our people are traveling there, so hopefully we'll get maybe some pictures and some videos, and I'm sure there's lots of people who will also do some streaming or some webcamming or post pictures, or hell, just come on to Discord somewhere and talk about it would be nice. So hopefully that works out, and thank you for letting us know that Nick Bison was heard. All right. So let's jump right into this Pochven mess. So last week, we had guests on, a couple guests. One was an author of a paper where he's been looking at the numbers from the economic report that's published monthly, and he's been digging away at some of the Pochven stuff, and he came up with a conclusion. In summary, short summary, a lot of ISK. 27 systems, so kind of this ISK per system and ISK per player ratio seemed way out of whack to him, and so he wrote a paper and he kind of approached us and we brought it on and walked through it, and we had an expert on is the way it was positioned, and there was some feedback that maybe the show, and I say we because I was the interviewer. As the interviewer, I'm just trying to get the story out of the people. It's not necessarily my position. Usually at the bottom of the little asterisks, the views of the guest don't necessarily reflect the views of the interviewer or the station, right? So keep that in mind. Very similar, even for tonight. But certainly a lot of feedback out on the YouTube channels, on the Discord almost instantly. Our guest tonight, Murray, was one of them, absolutely, who basically stood up and said, let me paraphrase, "You're fucking full of shit," I think is more or less his point of view. But we'll get to that.
I think that was a direct quote, wasn't it?
That might be a direct quote, Nick. You're right. That might be a direct quote. If it wasn't Murray, it certainly was one of the many other people in the Discord who certainly said something along those lines. So last week, the title was Fouston, we have a problem because Fouston was our guest. And the problem was, what the hell, why is this all this ISK? And, but Murray and others have pointed out, whoa, slow your roll there, Rundle, and guess, not as easy as you think. Pochven ain't that easy, folks. It's not just it's just not a stroll in HiSec. So with that, I'm going to let Murray introduce himself. He's going to be tonight's expert and bring an alternate point of view to these numbers. Murray, go ahead.
So, my name is Murray Rothbardo. I'm an FC with Rote Kapelle, which is one of the few groups that actually lives in Pochven in the current climate. I've spent a lot of time there since we moved in about April, so it's been a fair couple of months at this point. We've done a lot of fighting there, engaged with whatever mechanics are to engage with in terms of PvE, and all that good stuff. And I think the one big thing I'll say is it's not so much just that, it's harder to, make this money, which is kind of what the title implies, right? It's just that a bunch of the numbers he was describing were just wrong.
Okay.
He was just, he was taking the sticker price and then not doing any of the math underneath it, which a lot of that you only understand if you either talk to some folks who talk to CCP about it or by actually living in Pochven and kind of understanding where those numbers come from.
Okay, so do you want to? That's a good place to start then, right? So I know that Rote Kapelle has been around for a while. You've played for 4 or 5 years, somewhere around 2017. So 4 and change. Plenty of time to become an expert and understand. And if you guys have been there since March, April, plenty of time to figure out the mechanics. And I'll say it right off the bat. At least you got a +1 because you actually been in the damn systems. Have you actually run one of these invasions or these sites?
Yeah, so the sites you're referring to are observatory flashpoints.
Right.
And so there's technically 4 general classifications of stuff in Pochven. There's, in terms of fighting rats, there's the wormhole sites, which are basically any wormhole that goes to or from Pochven will have rats on either side of it. And these rats can be killed. When you kill them, you will get a payout at the end of that particular wave. And then some 30 minutes or so later, another wave will spawn. You can do that one. And then there's a third escalation as well. And you can do that one, with each escalation being progressively harder than the last one. There are also green sites, which is technically what observatory flashpoints are, sort of. But the regular green sites are a set of sites that are actually not limited to Pochven. There are also some of these sites in K-Space as well. But there are ones for rogue drones, sleepers, Edencom, and Triglavians. All 4 are present in Pochven. When they're finished, they respawn somewhere else in Pochven. And they will generally have a couple waves of rats and a single payout at the end. It's usually pretty small. You can also find some of the Edencom and Triglavian ones in systems that were invaded in K-Space. There aren't many of them, but they are around. Then you have observatory flashpoints, which are what people talk about when they talk about Pochven income, because they're really the only thing in Pochven that actually makes large amounts of money consistently. Running the green sites is a waste of time, bar maybe the exception of drone ones with some salvage that comes out of them. Running most of the wormhole escalations is a waste of your time. And then the only other site there is the World Arc, which, while is somewhat lucrative, is pretty rarely run because of the difficulties of doing so, and because running it nukes your triple avian standing, which makes doing things in Pochven not very fun.
Okay. So the flashpoints, right? So I think last week we talked. Another +1. You've actually run one, so that's good. The flashpoints. Did we get the mechanics correct? Right. So the moment you kill, I think it's a dreadnought, as I understand it, at the end of the flashpoint, you kill that. The payout happens, and is the next one instantly spawn?
So there are 3 sites that rotate around Pochven. They pretty much instantly respawn when they're finished. And so if somebody's running them, they will have a fleet out, and they'll be moving around the triangle looking for sites as they finish the one they just did.
Do they ever both show? Does it ever spawn in the same system where there's already one?
Yeah, it's possible. Any system is a potential target for them. If you get a couple in one system, lucky you. You don't have to run around at Pochven warp speeds, which are kind of slow, because Pochven has a warp speed penalty.
Right. So there's a warp speed penalty. That's good to know. 27 systems. It's the triangle. You can run around it. One of the premises of the analysis was, it's really actually kind of easy. Quote, I'm air quoting easy. Can't see it, but easy-ish to move from where you just finished a system to get your fleet that's designed to run one of these flashpoints and move 2 or 3 or 6 systems in some direction or the other. If you know where it is and you're on a triangle, the farthest you would need to go to the far end of the triangle would be 14 jumps, basically, right? But more than likely, it's going to be somewhere in between that, right? So that was a premise. Is that what's the reality of that premise?
I mean, that's right, but that's not different for any, traveling 14 jumps for PvE is the farthest anybody travels for PvE most of the time in any area of space.
Right.
If you're running missions, you're never going more than 1 or 2 jumps. If you're running D de-escalations, the max is 9, and if you're crabbing in whatever system, you're not even moving. So, I think it's easier to start here. So the reality of running these sites is that there is a wide variety of methods in which you can do them. And these methods depend heavily on 3 things. One is how many people you have, or how many accounts you can multi-box. The second is how much knowledge you have about those sites, because there are a lot of minute details in how the rats operate and how the site is run that you need to know if you don't want to die. And the third is how much money you're willing to invest. Because, yes, you can run them with a handful of people if you have a ton of game knowledge, and there's nobody else in Pochven who's willing to disrupt you. Because it's a very linear scale of, you go from, a peak, full fleet, heavy armor, we're ready to rock, all of our ships cost 2 bill, right? The kind of apex flashpoint running fleet, where if somebody wants to fight you, they need to be as good as you in the same ships, so your total fleet cost is 45 billion-esque, and they need to be willing to push you off, right?
All right.
Or they need to be Horde and bring 100 bombers, because they don't know how to fight in heavy armor, but besides the point. Or you could be on the other end and be in 300 million-esque worth of ships, but any individual person who feels like preventing you from running the sites can, easily, as long as they have a modicum of knowledge about how the sites work. And if anybody else is just out like crabbing, right? Even if they don't want to fight you, the methods that require fewer people take more time. They make it so you can't really PvP back. And so basically, the more active Pochven is, the less cheesable the sites are, because you don't have the time to do it. There's people out and about disrupting you. And if any actual fleet shows up, you just need to concede it because you can't fight them.
Okay. So that's okay. That makes sense. So that addresses the kind of the one of the issues that the feedback was that we made it seem easy, right? So it's not that easy. You're probably in the wrong fleet comp to have a PvP battle. It could be up to 14 jumps away. It could be a long distance. It could be all sorts of things, right? And so I had, in the meantime, Nick put up this slide, page 9 of this. So if it's okay, I'd like to just ask, hey, like this is the data from the game, and when I, just as a player, even if I'm not in Pochven and I see 8 billion and then 2 billion at totality, and then it goes 54, and then it ramps up to 226 in a matter of a few months. And you said you started out there in April where it was 85 billion, and it's now 4 times that amount of ISK. So what happened? Like, what's happening in Pochven that would explain this very large 3x from when you joined in the region, and whatever the math is, 10, 100 times over from totality point of view? How does that get explained?
Well, I don't like this by, what is this? All right, you've got the by month, which is actually useful. The rest of the numbers are kind of meaningless.
Yeah, I think this is the most important one.
You don't have any comparison.
A lot of people looked at the graphs, but I like this one. Just looking at Pochven, how do you explain what's happening in the Pochven payout? I've heard some things on the channels and stuff, like maybe this is a sum of multiple, like all the numbers. This isn't just Pochven. These are just the sites that, of course, can be across all of the universe, blah, blah, blah. But
so you have 4 broad time periods, so to speak. The first one, which I wasn't around for, was when things were just kind of broken all the time, and people weren't making much money, and nobody lived in Pochven, because Pochven was a terrible place to live. And so there wasn't much going on, and February is kind of a part of that, I think. I'm not too familiar with the exact timeline there, but it also doesn't really matter, so whatever. The next window of time is when you have Pochven with a little bit more activity. We were around for part of this era where there were people pretty consistently running the sites. And while you had crab sliding as a mitigator, the gates still had standings requirements, and that effort barrier prevented the vast majority of people from caring at all about Pochven. Rightfully or wrongfully so. And so while crab sliding was there as a pushback, people could still make enough money, because even though crab sliding requires basically no actual effort to steal money from the sites or ISK investment, the effort barrier from having to grind standings was enough to keep most casual people away from doing it. The fourth time period, which is what you see in May, or third time period rather, which is what you see in May and June, that is when the gates were open, because somebody was like, well, if you can't figure out a good way to do the site, but do Pochven, then just open the gate standings and everybody will come in. That was Phantomite. He'll admit to that. I don't know why CCP chose to run with it, but they did. And so basically what you had at that point was the people who could run the sites would run them, and then there would be 15 crab sliders on the outside. The payouts would get reduced to an infinitesimal amount. Everyone decided that it was a collective waste of their time, and nobody ran sites in Pochven pretty much at all. There'd be a handful of sites that would be sneaked here or there by some people who were more knowledgeable with mechanics, but for the most part, sites were barely getting run in Pochven. The place was pretty quiet. Now, about midway through July, or near the end of July, I should say, is when CCP finally got rid of crab sliding, and so people could actually run the sites with a reasonable amount of defense and get the money. And so at that point is when you get into the current era of a lot of people being out and active, and there also being a lot of fighting between these groups because there's enough native content to justify going out and fighting people.
Okay. Can you describe what crab sliding is for those people who don't know? I think another name for it was was it seagulling and crab sliding, right? Kind of the same thing, or are those two different?
Yeah, same thing.
Okay. Can you describe what that is, please?
So the site is soft capped at 15 people. So the way the ISK payout works is, for the most part, it scales up slightly as you go from 1 to 15 people in your fleet in the site. And it hits the max payout at 15 for the overall amount. If you do it with less, there's more money per person, but less overall. And if there are any people over the 15, then the overall payout is reduced on top of the per person payout being reduced. And so what would happen is somebody would go out and run sites in a 13, 14, 15-man fleet. And if 10 people were on the outside, all basically stealing a portion of that tick, which at the time was possible through practically anything, as long as you interacted with the site in the vaguest way possible, then the payout would drop. And running those sites in a 15-man fleet and getting everybody together in order to make maybe 100 mil an hour at best was a complete waste of everybody's time, because you can make that much money doing literally anything else in EVE that doesn't involve dying. And so crabbing died out.
Okay, so basically people were finding ways to drop themselves on to the payout ledger sheet without really doing anything. And was the reason for doing that, was that to screw with the 13 to 15 people legitimately trying to do it, or literally just, hey, I can make even 100 million by doing nothing. Thanks
money.
Very much. Or
I
both.
did it too. I would find somebody who was running it with a 15-man fleet, and I'd stick 4 characters on the outside in like claws or atrons or whatever. And even if they kill like 10 of your ships, it doesn't matter, because you get 1 half decent payout, and all those ships have been paid for, and I was getting like 4 decent payouts every time I did it.
Gotcha.
And so I would do that, and then the people who were actually running the sites would give up.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. So talking about, okay, at the time, so we've gone through how the payout kind of works. You've talked about, kind of how the wormhole thing works, and more or less kind of how what is available in terms of crabbing or ISK generating in Pochven, right? One of the premises was, I've heard this story. Someone else actually wrote it back as well, and in the show notes today, someone else brought it up again, that there's this guy who was running sites in like 13 golems. He got ganked a few times, but he was still running these things with like 13 golems. So there must have been a lot of ISK. Is that a legit story, or is that just people making bullshit up?
We've killed the guy like 4 times.
Okay, so it's legit. He's there.
3 of those, we caught a few of them, and once we wiped his entire fleet. I mean, it's not fun for him when it happens. Like, he loses like 40 bill, which is a lot of time that he needs to reinvest in running sites.
Right. Yeah,
because again, right? It's him and maybe one other person doing it.
Right.
And so while they are doing it in a lot of golems, which are marauders, right, which in theory have a lot of PvP potential, because they're multi-boxing so heavily, they can't actually utilize it properly.
Right.
And so if somebody shows up in anything that vaguely resembles an actual fleet and manages to catch him, he's dead. And he's going to lose a whole bunch of stuff. So he has to be super careful about when he scouts a site, make sure there's nobody set up for him, sneaking in using different methods of travel than just gating around, because most of the time when he dies is when he was like, I'm just going to gate it, and then he jumped into a bunch of bubbles and was like, I'm going to be dead.
Yeah.
So
it became a bad day.
So he has to put a lot more effort into moving around, right?
Sure,
which eats up time, which eats up effort, and that includes his game knowledge and understanding of Pochven. And so And when he loses his entire fleet, it's like, all right, well, now 15, 20 hours before we get that back. Like, maybe not quite that much time, but he's got a fair bit of time that he needs to invest in order to try and get that money back.
Right. So, but I brought it up partially because there was a few people who were like, "You're full of shit. Your show's full of shit. That shit doesn't happen." But it does, and so at least that was correct, right? I'm just trying to check off some things that the show was correct, so that we can really get to the bottom of why people got so fucking upset about the concept of the show. Because we did talk about things that were real, right? The numbers are real. There is a real spike. The thing where they fixed the situation where they fixed the sea gulling, they fixed that, or the crab sliding, they fixed that. That shows a tick. You talked about it, so yep, part of that was correct. They also fixed the standings problem, right? Where when you killed the final boss in the Dread, that you didn't screw up your triglaive standings, and you could now fix that. Um, that's correct too, right? And so I'm still looking at this graph, and I'm still seeing an enormous spike in an average per day. Again, 226 billion per day. That's a keep star a day if somehow you could get all that ISK to yourself. I'm still lost on what happened, what's happening in Pochven that allows this ramp from July, August. So it doubles in August and it triples to September in 3 months, right?
All right, we're going to have some fun here. So how much of that total number right there is actually coming from observatory flashpoints?
Good. Okay, now that's the real. I think that's one of the main. That's one of the main complaints about the last show was, hold on a minute, this is just one big number. You're just taking, like you said at the beginning of the show, a sticker number. It's 226 billion. Holy shit! But what is so? How would you find those numbers, or what do you think? Walk us through the numbers then.
All right. So notice in May and June, right? There's still almost 2 trillion. But anyone who was in Pochven will tell you that almost nobody was running observatory flashpoints at that point. So while there was certainly some amount of stuff occurring there, maybe in quieter time zones or what have you, what is still shown in that month is all of the ISK that comes from everything else that isn't those flashpoints. Because that number includes not just all the ISK paid out for anything Triglavian related in Pochven, it also pays out for everything Triglavian related in HiSec, and K-Space in general. So every time a wormhole gets run on the K-Space side, every time somebody runs an accelerator flashpoint in HiSec, of which there are 2, and they constantly respawn, and those 2 flashpoints generate large payouts of ISK as well.
Okay.
So you've got all of that. Okay. And so by my estimate, based on what I've seen over the shifts in numbers month to month, that is probably somewhere between like 6 and 800 billion a month. Okay. So if you're talking, is Pochven making too much money? You need to subtract that straight away because none of that other money is actually coming from Pochven. Okay. Now, the other things you need to make a note of are, and this was one of the most frustrating things to me, was the comparison to other regions of the game, which was silly. Because you'd say, like, oh, 5.5 trillion in August, right? Which we actually now know is only 4.7. So 4.7 trillion in August. And you only crabbed 1.7 trillion in Veil of the Silent or whatever, right? Except we all know that that is not the only thing people did in Veil of the Silent to make money. We know they mined, not just ore, but moons and ice and whatever. We know they ran DED sites, which any money from that is located in the exchange in of OPEs or in the sale of loot, which doesn't show up in that ISK total. If there was an incursion in Veil, which I don't remember if it was August or September, but I know there was one in August because they lost a bunch of supers in it. Any money they generated from that would be in the incursion number and not in the Veil of the Silent number.
All right.
And all of that doesn't include anything they did with industry, anything they did with gas huffing, all of that stuff, right? And all of these other things are things you can't do in Pochven. You're not going to build things in a station in Pochven. You're not going to mine in Pochven, which you can actually see on the MER. A grand total of like 20 billion ISK worth of stuff was mined for the entire month in Pochven by everybody there. And that was when Mercoxit was actually worth mining, which the value of that just fell off a cliff. So, probably going to be even lower now. So
Okay, I think this is
that.
all right.
And so, like, you are comparing a number that is like basically the entire income of Pochven, bar some drone salvage and maybe a bit of trig loot and some salvage, to a number that's like maybe a third of the actual income produced in another region, which is silly.
I think that's what the graph was, and Nick will pull up slide 8 because this is one of the slides that we talked about. I think this is kind of what you're talking about here, is the relationship of the Pochven numbers to incursions and sleeper and trig data, basically, and the rise of the red line on, and this is still the daily ISK payout number, and I think we did some rough napkin math and figured out, okay, maybe 400 billion is the kind of theoretical maximum if you kind of do some math. I don't know if you've done this math. I mean, in terms of how long it takes to run one, and if all of them can be run simultaneously 24 hours, and somehow Eve comes together and kills every single flashpoint back to back to back, there's a theoretical maximum, right?
Yeah, but that number's stupid.
Well, it gives you a boundary. It's not stupid if you do the math, if you do math analysis and you do economic analysis, because it gives you your maximum boundary. You know that if someone comes to you and says, holy shit, you can make 1.2 trillion ISK an hour, you'd be like, nope, now that's bullshit, because the theoretical maximum is 625 whatever, or 417 or whatever. You at least have a boundary. And with the boundary, you can then say, holy shit, we're at 50% of the boundary, or 10% of the boundary, or 92% of the boundary. So mathematically, it's not bullshit.
Nobody is going to ever show up and fight you, or disrupt you, or kill you.
Right.
And that's just blatantly untrue.
Right.
And so pretending that there's a situation in which that is actually going to be the case is silly. And again, in my mind, a complete waste of time. You can even look at the video that the Russian guys put out like 3 days ago of them roaming for 3.5 hours. They are, without a doubt, the best fleet by record that currently runs around Pochven. Up until Horde brought literally 100 people to kill them, they hadn't lost a fight, and they'd fought like 20-something odd times. Even that video, which is like from a 3.5 hour long roam on a single day, they run into like 4 different groups that they murder or get murdered by.
Right.
And that is another key point of trying to compare those numbers, right? Is you need to think about destruction as a component of that. Pochven is currently on track to break 1 trillion ISK destroyed, and that is just in PvP, not including losses to rats, which in Pochven are also significantly higher than they are in K-Space, because the rats are actually dangerous.
Okay.
And so that makes a lot of this stuff hard to compare, right? If we're talking about comparing this to incursions, right? Well, nobody ever dies in a HiSec incursion unless they literally fall asleep at their computer.
Right.
And so if you're talking ISK to risk, you could compare Pochven to incursions, you could compare it to Abyssal PvE, you can compare it to all these other things, and Pochven looks great because people actually die.
Right. And so fine, if you are making 226 billion an hour, that's fine, because you probably on whole, that group of people who made 226 billion lost 120 billion to make it. So they made only net 100 billion ISK per hour is kind of the point you're making, right?
Well, those numbers make no sense, right? You're running an average of 2, maybe 3 flashpoints an hour if you're got good spawns and whatnot, and nobody bothers you.
Okay.
Which both of those things occurring are big maybes. And so that's 6 to 9 billion spread across your entire fleet. And if you're in a goon throwaway Praxis fleet because you're scared of losing real ships, then yeah, you can pay for your entire fleet in an hour. But the fleets that make those fleets dock and have to give up for the day, the ones that are in heavy armor, those are like 45 bill. So those fleets need to run for 5, 6, 7 hours just to pay back their stuff if they all die.
Right. So looking at incursions, I think, is a reasonable one to look at, right? Because, like you said, unless you fall asleep, the risk of losing your ship is next to nothing necessarily because they got all the incursions figured out, right? So, so the increase, though, that has gone on in the last couple months has to be attributed to something, right? And does that mean that the average payout per person? I mean, the average payout per person can't go up because it's set, right? So, how does still? I see the increase in the data, right? And so, as part of one of the premises of the show, and by the way, for the audience, Fouston has joined us, so he can ask a few questions. It was his paper. This was unplanned, Murray. Sorry, but I hope you don't mind. He's going to ask some questions. But my question here is initially from the show last week and from the feedback, it's this decomposition of the number that is missing. So how do we go about really decomposing the number then and really coming up with a real, a real comparison? Because the number's there, 226 billion ISK per hour. The way that CCP is reporting it,
that number is not.
CCP reported
you
it.
said that was per
real.
day, and you keep saying per hour.
Oh, did I say per hour? Sorry.
Right?
All right, per day. My bad. It is per day. All right. Sorry, I made a mistake. Holy shit.
Well, real quick, let me jump in real quick because one of the things I noticed on the prior slide, I'm going to throw it back up for just a second, and I won't enlarge it because it's not going to be up that long, is the biggest increases I see are after the May-June timeframe. Beginning in July, it starts to go up. That kind of coincides with the end of the big war, too, doesn't it now? So more people are becoming available. And, in that respect, do you think that has much to do with it?
Maybe for a couple of the groups that are running. But most of it is just people realized you can actually go there. You can make decent money, and you can actually get fights. Like
Nick,
a lot of groups that do it
7?
to win money, like the Russians, NSH, ourselves, we do it to make money, but we also do it because it's actually interesting sometimes when you fight people. Like, a lot of the people who are doing this are doing it because they think every form of PvE is boring, but this one actually gets PvP. And that's why a lot of people get upset when you attack it, because the PvP that comes from this, via this self-fulfilling cycle of people willing to go and put and risk themselves to make this money because it's good money, then begets people trying to kill those people, which begets more people trying to kill those people, and the area becomes crowded. I can list off like 20 separate groups that operate in Pochven or day trip to Pochven off the top of my head. And I'm sure there's a whole bunch of others that do it that I don't notice because I'm just one time zone.
So earlier you mentioned that in, I think it was May and June, you said no one was running these Flashpoint sites. So the baseline you have to subtract out of any monthly total is the 2 trillion, the 1.8 trillion or 2 trillion. Why would you use those 2 months as a baseline when you have the entirety of the red portion of the graph as a baseline when flashpoints don't exist? Like, you can't say, oh, it's all ISK from outside of Pochven that's making this graph huge, when we have an entire period when flashpoints didn't work, and it's 2 billion ISK a day, and now all of a sudden it's 2 trillion ISK a month, and you're like, oh, it's totally not flashpoints, bro.
So, disregarding that little piece at the end, to the best of my knowledge, I believe accelerator flashpoints were not in existence in the current form that they are now. And I would say that most of that total is coming from people running the accelerator flashpoints in HiSec.
I ran an accelerator flashpoint on December 21st, 2020. So they definitely existed back then, and they definitely do pay out well, but it's just you cannot run them nearly as often as a flashpoint observatory.
Yeah, but they're also in HiSec, so it's perfectly safe, and there's no point in which you are forced to stop running because of PvP or because of anything else.
I totally agree with you. Like, the observation flashpoints are totally dangerous because you're in basically wormhole light, no local, you have no idea what's around you. But this ISK cannot be coming from anywhere else. All the way from the day that the wormholes were fixed back in like November 2020, I've been farming trigs. I farmed trigs the entire period of the totality until Hateless put out its videos and the prices on everything I was selling crashed. Like, that entire period, I was pulling in billions of ISK per day in non-ISK payouts. So like, what changed besides the flashpoint?
Running the trig sides of wormholes in Pochven was something that was, or running the case-based side of wormholes that went to Pochven is something that was also impossible before Pochven was a thing, because those wormholes didn't exist until Pochven did.
Right, the 13th of October. It's just hilarious. Every time I've pointed this out over the months, it's always, oh, it's ISK outside of Pochven, but where, when? It's on the graph that it's 2 billion ISK per day, and then all of a sudden flashpoints get fixed. Now it's 2 trillion ISK a month, 6 trillion ISK a month. Couldn't be flashpoints.
Well,
It's everything else.
That ain't 2 billion a day.
It's in slide 9. Average per day for the totality period.
The chart I'm looking at right now with that orange line isn't.
The orange line, that's the invasion. That's not when Pochven was created. One more slide down, Nick. The chart, just the numbers, no graph. The invasion has a total of 1.1 trillion ISK for the entire invasion was paid out. The totality period from which Pochven was created to when the flashpoints were fixed was a total of 252 billion total over 4 or 5 months, average of 2 billion ISK a day.
And what did that include?
What do you mean? What did that include?
What was running those sites to make? What sites were getting run to make that money?
Everything besides flashpoints, because after February 2021, flashpoints were fixed and your numbers exploded into the trillions per month. Like, I agree. There's no way for me to say that all 6.8 trillion is attributable to flashpoints, because Hateless put out videos, AC Face put out videos, everyone's put out videos on how to run trigs. But you're saying that a maximum like 12.5 or 13.5 million ISK site is contributing to a 6.8 trillion ISK per month payout, which is like 6 orders of magnitude. So I totally agree. Like, tons of destruction in Pochven, tons of PvP in Pochven. I wish I could live there, but none of my homeboys want to go. So like, I'm super jealous of you guys in there. But like, to say this is anything besides flashpoints being farmed is insane.
I disagree. I don't. When I was watching in June and May, there was nothing being run, particularly in June, rather.
All right, so let's just do some quick calculator math. If the 1.8 trillion is being run by the C729 wormholes in HiSec or LowSec, which is a payout of 13.5 million, that's like 153,000 wormholes run that month.
Right, but that doesn't include accelerators. It doesn't include any other green sites that were run. It doesn't, like, there's a lot of things that go into that. You can't just pretend that one component was all of it. And like I said earlier, I didn't even attribute that 1.8 solely to HiSec. I just said a good portion of it came from there.
A good portion. Dude, like, the only money to be made off trigs and HiSec are the C729s.
Accelerator flashpoints are included in that total, again.
Okay, so let's say you do an accelerator flashpoint in Essail, which is in Iridia. That's like 60 jumps from Jita. And then you've got to do one over in Cinque Lazon in, what is it? Bowelin. That's like 75 jumps your fleet has to travel. And you've got 2 of those, and you have to wait 90 minutes between respawns, or so I've been told. I can't farm them enough to figure that out. Like, it's 53 systems spread across all of New Eden versus...
Okay. So let's say between those two, you've got maybe 10 total accelerator flashpoints being run every day.
It's 25 billion.
Per day, that's pretty good.
So we've accounted for 25 of the 225 is what I think I just heard. So where's the other 200 billion coming from?
We already said that. Trick space.
I love it. I love the hate because that just means I was onto something, and everyone's just really mad that the lights are being shown, and that's awesome. Like it's a game.
Please don't try and pat yourself on the back too hard. People are upset because you're misrepresenting a bunch of numbers without any knowledge of where the details of it are, which I've already had to spend half an hour explaining a bunch of things that clearly weren't apparent when you brought this up the first time.
So did you dig into, I'm just going to ask, because I actually asked this multiple times of the show producer, did you get the numbers and dig through them yourself, just out of curiosity?
These numbers are available in the MER. I've been watching them myself, the whole time we've been in Pochven.
Just want to make sure that we don't run into a situation where it's something like, I don't have to look at numbers. So you've been looking at numbers, that's fair. Okay, so.
I don't know what I misrepresented besides that these numbers are straight from the MER, so I don't know what I can misrepresent.
You're telling me that you did not make a misrepresentation of claiming that Pochven creates more money than other places when you said that Pochven created that amount of money.
If you mine a rock, is that money?
And you compared it only to the bounties being produced by a single nullsec region, which you and I both know is a significant, but not even half portion of the income that gets produced from a nullsec region.
Okay, so when you mine a rock, is that straight ISK?
It's resources. They make you money. Who cares? To somebody who's actually making money, the form of it doesn't matter as long as they get it in the end. And when you're comparing Pochven to other places, you need to realize that that number you're looking at is the vast, vast majority of the income that gets produced in Pochven, because almost everything else is not worth doing, versus a nullsec region where the number you presented as a valid comparison is only a fraction of the overall money produced by that region.
When I say that the total of the Pochven income for September was greater than the bounties of the top three nullsec regions, I'm misrepresenting that. I said that it was just the bounties. I'm just so confused.
Well, you're trying to make a comparison of region to region, right? Which means you need to include all of the income for both of those regions. Otherwise, your comparison makes no sense.
I specified that it was just the bounty income.
And what were you trying to do with that comparison?
It's a lot of ISK.
Okay, and that lot of ISK means something to somebody. Why?
That's how we play the game? I'm just lost.
So you're saying it's a lot of ISK to point out that somebody could make a lot of money there, right?
They could make about 6.8 trillion.
Right, and somebody in Vale could also make 6.8 trillion. You're just pretending it isn't because you're only looking at the bounties.
I mean, I don't know, man. I can't misrepresent something if I say compared to the bounties.
Yeah, I think so let me just try and get some clarity here. What I think Murray is saying is, if I'm in this other region, when I do bounties plus mining plus whatever, I could go and make, 6.8 trillion. Or I could go to Pochven and I can make 6.8 trillion just running flashpoints. That's the real comparison. Bounty to just flashpoints or bounty to this Pochven number coming out of the CCP data is not a fair comparison, I think, is what Murray you're saying, because the income from the other region is being neglected in the comparison. And so this 3 times multiplier isn't real because you've discounted 3x of the real income. But what I think, is that correct, Murray?
Yeah,
okay.
He's building a region-to-region comparison and not comparing full region to full region.
Right. So this data, and so what I think Fouston is saying is, okay, the bounties, which is a number that I can get from the CCP data, is X, and the payout over time in Pochven, which is just PVE related, not mining, not anything else, is whatever 3x of or it's equal to the top 3 nullsec regions. And so bounty to the only thing in Pochven that represents or is close to bounties, like, is this weird number. So what's missing? If you would like to have a fair comparison on a PvE activity, would it be all income generated? Because I think that's unfair too. Mining or manufacturing, I make a lot of money in manufacturing. There's almost no risk in that. If we're talking about risk versus money reward, like where do you draw the line between I took a PvE ship out, I pew-pew-pewed for a while with me and my buddies, we all shared some income, rinse, repeat. That type of activity is what these Pochven numbers are, and that type of activity is what the bounty payouts are. To me, that seems like a reasonable comparison.
Everything in nullsec involves PvP. You have to fight to get the moons, you have to protect the mining ships, you have to fight to take the space to put the industrial structures down, right? And so when you're making a comparison of is an area making too much money compared to another area, you need to include all of the income generated in both of those areas. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense as a comparison. And when you compare a cherry-picked component of Pochven, which is the vast majority of its income, and a cherry-picked component of the nullsec region, which is like a third of its income, then suddenly you've got a terrible comparison. And to me, that's incredibly dishonest, right?
Okay.
And it's not like those other numbers aren't available. You can see how much people mine in the MER. You can see how much production is in a region in the MER. All of that data is also available. It's not like you can't make that comparison. It is easy to do if you just put in the effort.
All right. So
we can agree to disagree then. Like, I totally understand what you're saying, that the misrepresentation is me only including the bounty payouts, but that is the comparison I am making. Like, I didn't say compared to all 3 nullsec full regions. I said specifically to the pure liquid faucet ISK.
Right, and the way I added in the show, and I'm going to add it in here too, is back to kind of CCP, right? Like, you guys got 2 sides. You guys are looking at it. I'm like, okay, there's a third side here, which is the game designers. I am curious if this level of ISK was by design, and is it there to compensate, to Murray's point, because it's very hard to do some of these other things. You don't do them in Pochven, right, that you might have in nullsec or elsewhere. There's less ISK generating. So maybe this is by design, simply because, and this is where I think if it is by design, this is why people are like a little bit up in arms over it, is because it's like, no, you shouldn't nerf it or call it out or point it out or cause any problems with it, because if this gets impacted, then we're really screwed in Pochven, and poor Pochven residents now get fucked.
It is functionally the sole source of PvP, bar people getting standings, I guess. Which, I mean, yay, kill some jackdaws or whatever, nobody cares. And so basically, anybody who likes the fact that the PvP in Pochven is both A, readily available, B, interesting to do because it's mostly heavy armor brawling, which you don't see in nullsec because hack dominance, right? So it's something that's actually different. It's more akin to wormhole fighting than it is to nullsec fighting. And so people are excited about that. It's something new and interesting for a lot of folks. And then third, because the sites are capped at 15 people, right? And this is something that goons ran into. Goons showed up in Pochven, and they still run sites. But they used to initially, they ran it in like 15-man fleets, and got absolutely destroyed by people showing up and picking off individual ships, harassing them, or just showing up in a fleet and dunking them straight away. And so eventually they scaled up the size of their fleets, because that's what a block does, right? We've run into a problem. The solution to our problem is more people. And so they'd end up with like 40 people in fleet. But then you have to try and split that money between 40 people. And people get upset about the who gets what in what fleet and what job and whatever. And within like 2 or 3 weeks, their fleet numbers were back down to 15. Because nobody wanted to be the dude who was getting 50 mil to sit outside in the Saber and get killed by some nanogangers. And so, like, that downward pressure makes sure that the fights stay interesting. And what we've clearly seen in the destruction data is that as more people become aware of this and show up, people come in and start dying in large amounts. And that dying is mostly due to PvP, which people actually enjoy. So it's a good positive feedback loop.
Let's get the message out to the people. We need more people in Pochven.
Yeah, I like farming them.
I love Pochven.
You guys agree on something. See, building bridges here on Talking in Stations. Yeah, so I think, I think part of what I want to say here is for Fouston is, if you're interested in doing the numbers, or Murray too, like the numbers are there, bro. So, do your own graphs and try to pull the numbers together and make a really good counterpoint. Fouston, you can do it too. I don't want to just make this Fouston's problem, but, you kind of started it. So maybe you can, help pull in these numbers.
CCP started it.
Yeah, CCP started it. But maybe there's a way to pull the numbers together to make okay, so what happens? It pulls the numbers together, and it's 27 systems are on par with a 85 system nullsec range. Is that going to what's that message? It's a total bullshit number. I'm just guessing here. But what happens if 85 system section of nullsec is generating the same amount of ISK as a 27 system Pochven? Is that okay?
How many people from that 85 system region are day tripping into Pochven? I tell you, a whole bunch of them are. I know Frat runs sites, right?
Yeah.
So the thing is about Pochven is comparing it to a region like that doesn't make a lot of sense because it's somewhere that everybody can get to. And so, the vast majority, when I said earlier, 20 groups, do stuff in Pochven or day trip into Pochven, maybe 5 of those groups actually live there. The rest don't.
I know I don't.
And so, you're comparing an area where, people live in it and make money in it directly to an area where people go to it to make money. A more apt comparison would be looking at the systems that run, burner missions, for example, or run, level 5s in LowSec, where you have a lot of people who don't actually live there, but they have a bunch of carriers there, or a bunch of Dramules or Daredevils or whatever, right? In their little burner system. And when they need money, they go over there and they da-da-da-da-dee. Right. And a lot of money gets generated in 4 or 5 system little pockets.
Right. Now, for me, I think
those little pockets barely have any PvP. You get dropped by grease pain. Woohoo! That's about it.
Yeah. So I think that's actually, we're making it near the end of the show, but of this show. But I think that is, Murray, probably one of the best points tonight is that, in other regions, the money made there tends to reside and remain with the residents there in general, right? I'm making a general statement. But if you're off in Delve, the residents of Delve are kind of keeping the money, right? If you're off in Vale the Silent, those residents there are kind of keeping that money. But Pochven, that money, even though it might be 6.8 trillion a month, doesn't mean 6.8 trillion is staying in the people who live there, those 5 groups or whatever. It's like Vegas money, right? It's moving in and it's moving out. It's coming and it's going. And you might lose it all. People coming into Pochven might lose everything coming to try to get it. But chances are the winnings are leaving the building, right? They're going out somewhere. I think that's an excellent point that really actually does, to Fouston, kind of change a bit of the analysis a little bit, in all fairness. I think that's that. Now, what I'm interested in is how do you adjust the numbers then, or where is there a meaningful comparison, and where is the 226 billion average a day going? Because I have this mindset that, okay, so if you are one of these day trippers and you're medium-sized alliance, you could day trip into Pochven, do the flashpoint, do 1 a day for the next 30 days, and buy yourself a Keepstar. You might have some losses along the way. You're gonna have some PvP. You go in with your eyes open, aware of what's going to happen. Murray's waiting on the other side. He's going to try and come kill you. fuck y'all, we're coming to get our ISK, and then we're bailing, and we're going to put a Keepstar up somewhere else.
It's going to take you a long time to figure out all the mechanics.
Yeah, well,
That's they got a rent an FC program.
yeah.
New video next
Let me
week.
tell you, like, the groups that have been here a while have mostly figured out some things, but, like, I'll still catch people with mechanics. I can kill your entire fleet by myself if I want to. You don't know what you're doing? It's easy. I don't even need to call my friends. Just me, myself, and I.
All right.
It's been great chatting, boys, but I gotta go do AT practice, so I'll catch you later. Thanks
Sounds
for
good.
letting me hop in. Murray, nice to talk to you. Nice to meet you.
Thanks for the point and the counterpoint.
Yeah.
See you guys later.
Bye.
See ya.
Yeah, all right. And so maybe this is where it's a good time, to kind of wrap up the show. Thanks, Fouston, for jumping on. I didn't know he was even going to be listening. Murray, thank you very much for allowing him. I think you guys had a very open and spirited debate and kept it friendly, which I appreciate. We're not, I wasn't here to have a sparring league started tonight. I think there's enough interest in this. And there's people who still want to talk about things, and I think this might be a topic on our Sunday show. Murray, I'll let you talk to Nick and others to see if you're available for Sunday as well. But maybe there's some more analysis. Maybe there's a way to push CCP to say, okay, look, guys, we're going nuts out here. Could you help us make a meaningful comparison? But I think we just kind of made this really important point. A meaningful comparison means you got to find a way to keep the ISK in the region for you to do a region to region. But the amount of ISK being generated in the flashpoints certainly has increased. This is still one item remaining for me, is that there's just, there's a significant increase. The numbers are there. It's increasing in Eve. Let's take the region to be all of Eve. Somehow these numbers have increased. What are you guys doing right? What are you doing wrong? Can people get in on it?
It's super simple. More people are running them. More people are dying, right? Like, there's nothing fancy about it. It's a one-sentence answer.
Fair enough. All right. Okay, well then, let's wrap this show up. Murray, again, thank you very much.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. And Nick, thanks for the amazing engineering work in the background. And we'll call that a show for tonight. I'm Rundle Allnighter. This has been Talking to Stations. Thanks for spending time with us. Good night, everyone.